February 14, 1932, 947-year-old gangster named Bumpy Johnson walked into an office on 139th Street and did something no man in Harlem had ever done. He knelt. Not out of weakness, not out of fear, out of respect. The woman sitting behind that mahogany desk was Stephanie St. Clair, the most powerful person in Harlem. And what happened in that room over the next 60 minutes didn't just change Bumpy Johnson's life, it created a 36-year empire that Dutch Schultz, Lucky Luciano, and the entire Italian mob couldn't break. This is the story of the day Bumpy Johnson became the Godfather of Harlem, and it started with him on his knees. To understand what happened that Valentine's Day night in 1932, you need to understand three things: Harlem in 1932, Stephanie St. Clair, and the monster trying to destroy her. Harlem in 1932 was a kingdom without a king. The Renaissance was fading. The Depression had hit hard. But there was one business that still made money: numbers. The illegal lottery. People bet pennies on three-digit numbers. If your number hit, you won $50. For people making $7 a week, those pennies were hope, and hope was currency. The numbers racket in Harlem made millions every year, and one woman controlled it all: Stephanie St. Clair, Madam Queen. She wasn't born in Harlem. She came from Martinique, a Caribbean island where women ran businesses and men respected their power. She arrived in New York in 1912 with $40 and a philosophy: never bow to anyone. By 1932, she'd built the largest numbers operation in Harlem. 40 policy banks, 300 runners, $500,000 a year in profit. She was 45 years old, elegant in emerald green dresses and pearl necklaces. She spoke 3 languages, quoted French philosophers, and could calculate odds in her head faster than any accountant. She was also the only person in Harlem who wasn't afraid of Dutch Schultz. Dutch Schultz was a German Jewish mobster from the Bronx who'd made millions bootlegging during Prohibition. But Prohibition was ending, and Dutch needed a new empire. So he looked south to Harlem, saw all that money flowing through the numbers game, and decided he wanted it. Dutch didn't negotiate. He took. He'd send his enforcers into black neighborhoods, beat up policy bankers, burn down their operations, force them to pay tribute. By January 1932, he controlled numbers in the Bronx, Brooklyn, and parts of Queens. Only one territory remained untouched: Stephanie St. Clair's Harlem. Dutch had tried. In November 1931, he sent 3 men to Stephanie's office with a message: work with Dutch, pay tribute, or get buried. Stephanie looked at these white men sitting in her club and said something that became legend: tell Mr. Schultz that Madam Queen doesn't pay rent to landlords she doesn't acknowledge. Harlem belongs to Harlem. Now get out. The men left, reported back to Dutch, and Dutch Schultz, who'd never been told no by anyone, certainly not by a black woman, made a decision: burn it all down, starting with her. That's where Bumpy Johnson comes in. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was 27 years old in 1932. He'd come to Harlem from Charleston, South Carolina, in 1919 when he was 14, ran with street gangs, did time in Sing Sing for theft, got out in 1930. He was different from other muscle. He was smart. He'd educated himself in prison, reading Shakespeare, Voltaire, Sun Tzu. He understood that respect in Harlem wasn't bought with fear. It was earned with loyalty. When local shopkeepers got shaken down by cops, Bumpy made it stop. When slumlords tried to evict families, Bumpy made them reconsider. He was strategic, and he refused to work for Dutch Schultz. Stephanie had been watching Bumpy for 2 years. She'd heard the stories. The young man who'd walked into a Bronx social club alone and told Dutch's lieutenant that Harlem wasn't for sale. The enforcer who'd protected 3 numbers runners from a mob shakedown without firing a single shot. The strategist who understood that power wasn't about loudness, it was about positioning. And on February 12, 1932, when Dutch's threats became real, Stephanie sent word to Bumpy through a mutual friend, a bartender named Willie the Fish Jackson. Willie found Bumpy at Small's Paradise on 135th Street. It was 11 p.m. Saturday night. The jazz quartet was playing. Bumpy was sitting at the bar drinking bourbon, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, white shirt, no tie. He never wore ties. Willie leaned close and whispered, "Madam Queen wants to see you, says it's urgent." Bumpy took a slow sip of his drink. "When?" "Tomorrow night. Her office. 9 p.m. Come alone." Bumpy didn't answer right away. He knew what this meant. Stephanie St. Clair didn't call meetings unless something had shifted, and if she was calling him, that meant the situation with Dutch had escalated beyond negotiation. Bumpy had a choice: walk into that office and potentially walk into a war, or stay out, stay safe, and watch Harlem fall to Dutch Schultz piece by piece. He finished his bourbon, looked at Willie. "Tell Madam Queen I'll be there. February 14th, Valentine's Day." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Dutch Schultz chose that day to make his move. At 7 a.m., 3 of Stephanie's policy banks were firebombed. One on 125th Street, one on 135th, one on 145th. Simultaneous attacks. Dutch's signature. The buildings burned fast. No one was killed, but the message was clear. This is just the beginning. By 8 a.m., word had spread through Harlem like wildfire. Dutch Schultz had declared war on Madame Queen. Half of Stephanie's runners didn't show up for work that morning. They were scared, and they had good reason to be. Dutch had 40 men, proven killers, money, political connections, and he'd never lost a territory war. At 8:47 a.m., Dutch sent another message. A messenger boy, maybe 16 years old, knocked on Stephanie's office door. He handed her an envelope. Inside was a single playing card, the Queen of Spades, and written on it in Dutch's handwriting, "Last chance. Tonight, midnight, you come to me, or I come to you." Stephanie sat in her office all day, thinking. She was a brilliant strategist, but she understood mathematics. Dutch had the numbers. More men, more guns, more money. She could fight. She could go down swinging, but that would mean Harlem burning, innocent people dying, her 40 policy banks destroyed. Everything she'd built for 20 years, gone. There was another option. Submit, pay tribute to Dutch, keep operating under his umbrella, like the other policy bankers had done in Brooklyn and the Bronx. But that meant betraying her principle, never bow to anyone. There was a third option, one she'd been considering for 3 weeks. Find someone who could stand between her and Dutch, someone smart enough to strategize, dangerous enough to fight, loyal enough to protect Harlem instead of selling it out, someone who didn't want power for power's sake, someone who wanted to protect the community. She'd only met one person who fit that description, Bumpy Johnson. At 9 p.m., Bumpy walked into Stephanie's office. The office was on the second floor of a building on 139th Street, above a barber shop. The stairs creaked. The walls were deep burgundy, lit by 2 brass lamps. The air smelled of cigar smoke and jasmine perfume. Behind a mahogany desk sat Stephanie St. Clair. She wore an emerald green dress, pearls around her neck, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her hands were folded on the desk in front of her. Calm, steady, but Bumpy saw the tension in her eyes. To her right stood 2 men, Casper Holstein, her accountant, a thin man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses, and Marcus the Deacon Williams, her head of security, a mountain of a man who'd been with her since 1922. Both men nodded at Bumpy. Respect. Bumpy took the chair across from Stephanie. He didn't speak, just waited. "Do you know why I called you here?" Stephanie's voice was measured, controlled, but there was weight behind it. "Dutch," Bumpy said simply. Stephanie nodded. "He firebombed 3 of my banks this morning, sent me a message tonight. I have until midnight to come to him. Submit, or he burns Harlem down." She paused. "I'm not going to submit." "Then you're going to war," Bumpy said. "A war I can't win alone, not against 40 armed men." Stephanie leaned forward slightly. "So I'm offering you a partnership. You protect my operation. You become my enforcer, my strategist, my right hand. In return, I'll make you the most powerful man in Harlem. You'll control half of everything I make. You'll have access to my network, my influence, my resources, and when I'm gone, this empire becomes yours." The room went silent. Casper Holstein shifted uncomfortably. Marcus Williams watched Bumpy carefully, hand resting near his waistband. Bumpy didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at Stephanie, processing. "You're asking me to go to war with Dutch Schultz. I'm asking you to protect Harlem. There's a difference." "And if I say no," Bumpy asked, "then Dutch takes Harlem, and everything we've built becomes his. Your neighborhood, your people, your community, all under the control of a man who sees black people as nothing more than profit margins. You know what Dutch does to neighborhoods he controls. You've seen Brooklyn, you've seen the Bronx. He bleeds them dry." Bumpy was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked the question that mattered most. "Why me?" Stephanie smiled. Not a warm smile, a knowing smile. "Because you're the only man in Harlem who told Dutch's people no and walked away. Because when you protect someone, it's not about money, it's about principle. Because you're smart enough to know that this isn't just about numbers. It's about keeping Harlem ours." She leaned back. "And because you're the only man I trust not to sell me out the moment Dutch offers you more money." Bumpy stood up, slowly, deliberately. He walked to the window, looked out at 139th Street. Below, people were walking home from church, from dinners, from late shifts. Normal people, people who had no idea that their neighborhood was about to become a war zone. He turned back to Stephanie. "If I do this, I do it my way. No unnecessary violence, no collateral damage. And we don't just fight Dutch, we outsmart him." "Agreed. And one more thing," Bumpy said. His voice dropped. I don't work for you, I work with you. Partners, equals. Stephanie stood. For the first time that night she smiled. A real smile. Then we need to seal it properly. That's when Stephanie did something Bumpy wasn't expecting. She came around the desk, stood in front of him, and extended her right hand, palm down. In Martinique, where I'm from, we have a tradition. When two people form a sacred partnership, when power is transferred or shared, there's a ceremony. You kneel, you place your hand on mine, and you swear your loyalty, not to me as your boss, to the partnership, to the community we're protecting. Bumpy looked at her hand, then at Marcus and Casper, then at Stephanie. You want me to kneel? I want you to honor a tradition that means something. This isn't about submission, it's about respect. It's about acknowledging that we're building something bigger than either of us. Bumpy Johnson had killed men, had stared down cops, gangsters, and anyone who crossed him. He'd spent his entire life refusing to bow to anyone. But standing there in that office, looking at Stephanie St. Clair, understanding what she was really asking, he made a decision. He knelt, slowly, deliberately, placed his right hand on top of hers, and looked her in the eyes. I swear, Bumpy said quietly, to protect this partnership, to protect Harlem, to fight anyone who tries to take what we've built, and to honor you, not as my boss but as my partner and my equal. Stephanie placed her left hand on top of his. And I swear to trust you with everything I've built, to split power and profit equally, and to never ask you to compromise your principles for mine. We rise together, we fall together, this is our bond. What Bumpy and Stephanie didn't know, what history books won't tell you, is that they weren't alone. Across the street, on the rooftop of a building on 139th, 3 of Dutch Schultz's men were watching through the window. They'd been sent to spy, to confirm that Stephanie was alone, vulnerable. One of them, a thin-faced enforcer named Lenny the Weasel Kowalski, had binoculars trained on that second-floor office, and when he saw Bumpy Johnson kneel before Stephanie St. Clair, when he saw that ceremony, he went pale. "Boss needs to see this," Lenny whispered to the other two. What's happening?" one asked. "Bumpy Johnson just swore loyalty to Madam Queen, and I've never seen anything like it. This isn't just business, this is something else." By midnight, word had reached Dutch Schultz. He was in his office at the Harmony Social Club in the Bronx, waiting for Stephanie to show up and submit. She never came. Instead, one of his lieutenants, a man named Tommy the Hammer Ruggiero, walked in with news that made Dutch's blood boil. "Stephanie didn't show, and we got a problem. Bumpy Johnson's with her now. Full partnership. They did some kind of ceremony. Kneeling, hands, the whole thing. It's official." Dutch stood up from behind his desk. His face went red. "Bumpy Johnson? That kid? You're telling me she picked him over me?" "Boss, it's not just about picking. They're building something. And every runner, every policy banker, every hustler in Harlem is going to side with them, because Bumpy's one of them. We're not." Dutch grabbed a whiskey bottle from his desk, threw it against the wall. Glass shattered. Amber liquid dripped down the wallpaper. "Then we go in hard. 40 men. We burn every policy bank, every runner, every business that works with her. And we don't stop until Harlem begs us to take over." Tommy shifted uncomfortably. "With all respect, boss, that's going to start a war we might not win. Not in their neighborhood. Not with Bumpy Johnson strategizing." Dutch stared at him, and for the first time in his career, Dutch Schultz realized he'd miscalculated. He'd thought this was about money, about territory, but it wasn't. It was about identity, about a community protecting itself, and you can't beat that with guns alone. "We'll see," Dutch said coldly. "We'll see." By morning, every hustler, policy banker, and street soldier in Harlem knew Bumpy Johnson and Madam Queen were partners, and that changed everything. People who'd been scared of Dutch the day before suddenly found their courage. Runners who'd stopped working showed back up, because they weren't just working for Stephanie anymore. They were working for Bumpy, one of their own, someone who understood the streets. Over the next 6 months, Dutch tried everything. He sent enforcers. Bumpy sent them back in ambulances. He tried bribing politicians. Bumpy had better connections. He tried cutting off supply routes. Bumpy found new ones. And every time Dutch made a move, Bumpy was 3 steps ahead. Because Bumpy didn't fight like a gangster, he fought like a strategist. By August 1932, Dutch gave up on Harlem, not publicly, but quietly. He pulled his men back, focused on other territories, and for the first time in his career, Dutch Schultz had lost. Not because he wasn't strong enough, because he'd underestimated a 27-year-old strategist and a 45-year-old woman who refused to bow. The partnership between Bumpy Johnson and Stephanie St. Clair lasted from 1932 until Stephanie's death in 1969, 37 years. They never betrayed each other, never broke their oath. Stephanie made Bumpy the most powerful man in Harlem, and Bumpy protected her empire like it was sacred. When Stephanie got arrested in 1935, Bumpy kept the operation running. When Bumpy went to prison in 1952, Stephanie made sure his family was taken care of. It wasn't just business, it was loyalty, the kind you can't buy, the kind you earn. Years later, in 1966, a young journalist from Ebony magazine interviewed Bumpy Johnson. She asked him, "What's the most important moment of your life?" Bumpy was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "February 14th, 1932, the day I knelt before Madam Queen. People think kneeling is weakness. It's not. Kneeling before someone you respect, someone you're building something with, that takes more strength than standing." That night changed everything. When Stephanie St. Clair died in 1969, she was 82 years old. Her funeral was held at St. Philip's Church on 13 Street. Hundreds came to pay respects. And standing in the back, trying not to be noticed, was Bumpy Johnson. He was 64 now, gray in his hair, but his eyes were the same, cold, calculating, sad. After everyone left, Bumpy walked up to the casket. He knelt, placed his hand on the wood, and whispered something that only two people in history knew the meaning of. "We built something that'll never die. Thank you for trusting me." He stood, straightened his tie, and walked out of that church. On Stephanie's grave, someone placed a wreath the next day. No card, no name, just a wreath of white lilies with a single phrase woven in gold thread. "My Queen." Everyone in Harlem knew who sent it. Bumpy Johnson died a year later, in 1968, heart attack at Wells Restaurant. But what he and Stephanie built, that partnership that started with a ceremony in a second-floor office on Valentine's Day 1932, that legacy lived on, because they proved something that Dutch Schultz, Lucky Luciano, and every white mobster in New York couldn't understand. Power isn't just about guns and money. It's about loyalty. It's about respecting people who deserve respect. It's about building something with someone, not taking something from someone. And sometimes the strongest thing a man can do is kneel. If this story of respect, loyalty, and the partnership that built an empire moved you, hit that subscribe button and smash that like. Share this with someone who needs to understand what real power looks like. Drop a comment below. Would you have knelt?